attend the wedding. At that moment, Dracula tells Mavis that her grandfather does not approve of her relationship with a human. Mavis then asks him if he still sees Johnny as a bad person. She tells him that nothing matters to her as much as being happy. A year later, Mavis and Johnny visit Dracula and ask him to fly with Mavis. Dracula doesn't understand why, but he agrees. They both transform into bats and fly high into the sky. That's when Dracula is shocked to learn that his daughter is pregnant. Overjoyed by the news, he listens as Mavis tells him that she isn't sure if their child will be a vampire or a human, but she secretly hopes the baby will be human, just like Johnny. Time passes, and Mavis gives birth. On the baby's first birthday, Dracula argues with Johnny's family, who believe the child is human. Dracula, however, insists that he is a vampire. When Dennis turns 2, Mavis calls Johnny, who rushes over with Dracula. She excitedly tells them that Dennis has spoken his first word, Dracula, in the same new way the hotel employees have been talking ever since Johnny started modernizing the hotel's operations. As they sit together, Johnny explains that this is the best way to attract more visitors, especially now that many humans come to stay at the hotel. That night, Dracula sneaks into Dennis's room to teach him how to transform into a bat. Just then, Mavis walks in and finds them dancing together. She disapproves, saying that Dennis should be getting used to sleeping early because he will be attending school during the day. Dracula argues that there's a monster kids party and Dennis should attend. Mavis, however, tries to make her father understand that Dennis is human and can't play with monster children the same way. She then asks Dennis to watch a human-made cartoon about monsters, which Dracula strongly dislikes. Later that night, Dracula puts Dennis in bed and sings him a lullaby until he falls asleep. When the Monster Kids party finally begins, Mavis reluctantly agrees to let Dennis attend. Suddenly, Dennis's first baby tooth falls out. Dracula is thrilled, thinking this means Dennis is growing fangs and will become a vampire. But Mavis tells him that Dennis is human. He will never grow fangs. Dracula is later shocked to learn from Mavis that she and Johnny are considering moving to California, where Johnny grew up. Mavis insists that it's a safer place for Dennis. Dracula immediately turns to Johnny and asks if he agrees with Mavis's decision. Johnny hesitates and says they haven't decided yet. Later, Frankenstein visits Dracula, who is lost in thought. Frankenstein suggests that Dracula spend more time with his grandson and proposes a plan. He will convince Mavis and Johnny to take a vacation while Dracula stays with Dennis. Dracula eagerly agrees. Before leaving for their vacation, Mavis carefully reviews everything about Dennis's care with Dracula, making sure he knows his food, drink, and sleep schedule. She even offers to take Dennis with her if it's too much for Dracula to handle. But Dracula insists that he'll check in with her via video calls every day to keep her updated. As soon as Mavis and Johnny leave, Dracula takes Dennis, gathers his monster friends, and sets off in a car to teach Dennis how to be a real monster. Meanwhile, Mavis is excited to visit Johnny's hometown. She wants to see every part of his life before they met. She tries to call the hotel to check on Dennis, but Johnny distracts her each time. Dracula's first attempt to teach Dennis monster skills starts with Frankenstein, who tries to show Dennis how to scare people. But when Frankenstein attempts to frighten 2 girls, they recognize him and ask for selfies, ruining the lesson. Dennis, trying to imitate him, is also seen as cute rather than scary. Next, Dracula asks his werewolf friend to demonstrate hunting. The werewolf, excited, chases after a deer, only to get tired because he hasn't hunted in years. Instead, the deer outsmarts him. Then, the mummy tries to give Dennis a lesson, taking him through an old monster hideout. Back in California, Mavis and Johnny visit a skate park. Johnny tries to impress Mavis by riding a skateboard, but ends up breaking it. Mavis, on the other hand, effortlessly skates, impressing the children. She tells Johnny that California seems like the perfect place to raise Dennis. Mavis then tries calling Dracula again to check on Dennis, but just before answering, Dracula quickly puts sunglasses on Dennis, making it look like he was playing a superhero game. Dracula reassures Mavis that Dennis is doing great and having fun with his grandpa. Before she can ask more questions, the call disconnects due to bad reception. Back at the hotel, Dracula is upset to learn that Mavis is enjoying her time in California. He realizes that if she feels comfortable there, she might. Dracula takes Dennis to the vampire summer camp, where he himself learned how to hunt rats and use his supernatural abilities as a child. However, Dennis is more interested in playing tennis with the other kids rather than learning how to be a monster. Dracula, frustrated that his grandson is growing up without monster instincts, insists on teaching him the basics of being a true vampire, as he believes Dennis is developing too slowly. When they arrive at the camp, Dracula is shocked to see that the training methods have completely changed since his childhood. That night, determined to teach Dennis the old-fashioned way, Dracula takes him to a high tower and decides to throw him off, believing that the instinct to fly will kick in. However, Dennis simply falls, and Dracula has to rush to catch him at the last moment before he hits the ground. The camp supervisor witnesses this and immediately reports it to Mavis, Dennis's mother. Meanwhile, Dracula tries to hypnotize the supervisor into forgetting what happened, but he fails because the supervisor is a vampire himself. Back in California, a group of humans, disguised as monsters, approach Mavis in an attempt to make her feel comfortable in her new surroundings and convince her to stay. However, Mavis isn't interested in making friends. Her only concern is raising her son away from the hotel so he can experience different things and grow up to be well-adjusted, unlike her, who felt out of place as a child. Johnny tries to reassure her, telling her that she is beautiful, and if their son grows up to be like her, he will be the luckiest person in the world. Mavis smiles and tells him that they will be happy together, no matter where they live. Later, Mavis receives a video showing Dennis in the middle of a burning hotel. She panics and immediately calls her father, demanding to know where they are. Dracula stutters, unable to come up with an excuse, and Mavis decides to return to the hotel immediately. She rushes to the airport to book a ticket, but the airline employee coldly tells her there are no direct flights. Frustrated, Mavis decides to fly there herself. Transforming into a bat, she grabs Johnny and soars through the sky toward the hotel. At the same time, Dracula is flying back to the hotel with Dennis, panicking about what will happen when Mavis arrives. When they all reach the hotel at the same time, Mavis confronts Dracula, telling him that she used to be afraid of her son growing up around monsters, but now she's even more afraid of him growing up around his grandfather. Dracula tries to explain himself, saying that while he allowed humans into the hotel, he never truly let them into his heart. But Mavis, furious, takes Dennis and leaves, saying they are going to Johnny's parents' house. As they pack, Mavis tells Dennis about California and his grandparents. Dracula, heartbroken, realizes that his daughter is really leaving. She reassures him that they will call every night to check in. Shortly after, Johnny's extended family arrives at the hotel, having been invited by Mavis. Dracula is shocked to learn that his daughter has also invited her grandfather, who absolutely despises humans, to a grand feast to meet Dennis. Realizing the disaster that could unfold if Mavis's grandfather finds out the truth, Dracula quickly warns Johnny that they must keep up the illusion. He tells Johnny's family that the feast is a costume party and that they must all dress as vampires and monsters. Dracula then attempts to train Johnny to speak and behave like a monster so he can blend in. When Mavis's grandfather finally arrives at the hotel, Dracula instructs Frankenstein to keep him away from any humans to avoid exposure. The grandfather is curious about Dennis, and Dracula reassures him that Dennis's vampire traits are just developing slowly, just like his own fangs took time to grow. To speed up the process, Dracula hatches a desperate plan. He decides to scare Dennis so badly that his vampire instincts will finally emerge. During a stage performance at the hotel, Dracula attempts to frighten Dennis, hoping it will trigger his transformation. However, Mavis sees through the plan and becomes furious. She argues with Johnny after realizing he was in on the scheme with her father. Heartbroken, Johnny storms out of the hotel in tears. Things take a turn for the worse when Mavis's grandfather discovers that Johnny and his family are actually humans, not vampires. Furious, he confronts Dracula, who finally stands up to him. Dracula declares that he no longer hates humans and that his grandson is the sweetest and kindest child he has ever met. He tells his grandfather that if he cannot love Dennis simply because he is half human, then that makes him a fool. Hearing these words, Mavis embraces her father, touched by his acceptance of her family. Meanwhile, Dennis is nowhere to be found. He is sitting outside with a young monster girl, feeling sad because he doesn't fit in with either humans or monsters. Suddenly, a real monster appears and tries to kidnap Dennis. As the entire hotel panics and searches for Dennis, something unexpected happens. Dennis's vampire instincts finally awaken. His fangs emerge, and he fearlessly attacks the monster, proving that he is, in fact, a true vampire. After the chaos settles, Mavis and Johnny decide not to move to California after all. Instead, they agree to stay at the hotel, but plan to visit California every vacation. And so, the story begins with Dracula, a vampire living in Transylvania. He is seen riding a train with his monster friends, disguised as humans so that no one will recognize them. Suddenly, a mad scientist bursts into their cabin, shouting that there are monsters among them and that he can expose them. As he strikes a match, the flames illuminate the ceiling of the train, revealing the monster's true forms. But Dracula stands his ground, telling the scientist that he will never win. Just as Dracula's ancestors have survived for centuries, he too will continue to thrive, proving that no matter what, family always comes first. Mavis feels nervous and doesn't want to go out to see Johnny before the wedding. Her friends reassure her that it's completely normal. All monsters get nervous on their wedding day. They even tell her how her father, Dracula, went through the same thing. Meanwhile, Dennis, Dracula's grandson, accidentally ruins the wedding with his dog. But Johnny quickly saves the day by becoming the DJ, getting all the monsters to dance together and bringing the celebration back to life. During the party, a beautiful woman approaches Dracula and asks him to dance. But Dracula, feeling shy and awkward, panics and runs away. His friends tease him about it, telling him that it's time to move on from the loss of his wife and enjoy life again. Dracula, however, insists that he's happy with just his daughter, her husband, and his grandson. Despite his words when he's alone, Dracula finds himself longing for companionship. At one point, he even tells someone that he's looking for a new employee to help clean the hotel. Mavis notices that her father seems stressed from all the work at the hotel. Wanting to help, she decides to surprise him with a family vacation. She takes the entire family on a trip, hoping he can relax. Dracula, who hates surprises, tries to get her to tell him the details, but Mavis reassures him that she has planned everything perfectly so he can enjoy himself. Meanwhile, Dennis secretly checks on his dog, whom he managed to sneak onto the trip without anyone noticing. When they arrive at their destination, Dracula and his family are shocked to discover that Mavis has booked their vacation at the Bermuda Triangle. The place is filled with ancient sunken ships, and the trip itself is aboard a massive luxury cruise ship for monsters. Dennis soon realizes that pets aren't allowed on the ship, so he hides his dog to make sure he can bring him along. Meanwhile, Murray the mummy gets excited about all the fun activities available on the cruise, but Dracula dismisses his enthusiasm, saying that all those activities could just as easily be done at their hotel. Murray argues that their hotel isn't floating in the middle of the ocean like this ship, but Dracula isn't impressed. Until suddenly, his eyes widen and his heart skips a beat. He sees the ship's captain, Erica, and immediately feels something strange. Mavis, seeing her father's reaction, panics and assumes he's having a heart attack or a stroke. But in reality, Dracula is simply mesmerized by Erica. The ship is headed for Atlantis, the legendary lost city. Later, Erica approaches Dracula and introduces herself. But Dracula is so flustered that he starts speaking gibberish. His friends quickly pull him away and tease him, realizing that he has fallen for her. That night, the monsters enjoy a relaxing party on the ship's deck, free from the usual chaos of their children. Meanwhile, Erica sneaks into the engine room, revealing her true intentions. It turns out that her grandfather is the same mad scientist who tried to hunt down monsters years ago. She tells him that he was right. Monsters are disgusting creatures. She confesses that when she first met Dracula, she had wanted to destroy him on the spot. Her grandfather reminds her to stick to the plan. Years ago, he discovered the existence of a powerful weapon capable of destroying all of Atlantis, and he has spent his life searching for it. Now, he intends to use it to wipe out Dracula and the rest of the monsters. He warns Erica not to kill Dracula yet, as it could ruin their plan. But Erica, determined, insists on eliminating him anyway. However, each time she tries to kill him, her attempts hilariously fail. Meanwhile, Dracula's friends ask him how Mavis would react if she found out he had feelings for someone other than her mother. They tell him that all Mavis wants is for him to be happy, and she would never be upset about anything that brings him joy. Later, Mavis approaches her father, happy to see him enjoying quality family time. The whole group plays water volleyball in the ship's pool. Then, Erica announces that they are about to reach their first destination, a volcanic underwater site. She asks everyone to prepare their diving gear so they can explore the ocean's wonders. Dracula's friends try to convince him that Erica is interested in him, but he dismisses the idea, saying he's only here to enjoy a family vacation. When they go underwater, Dracula and his family are guided by a tour guide who explains the history of the volcanic site. Meanwhile, Erica secretly pilots a small submarine disguised as a fish, hunting for Dracula to finally eliminate him. However, as she approaches, real fish gather around the submarine, making it difficult for her to see. At the same time, the monsters try to take pictures with what they think is a rare fish, unaware that it's actually Erica's submarine. Mavis, however, notices something suspicious and realizes Erica